Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this event hosted by Simplex 3D and First American TitleVest. I'm Amit Sharvit. I'm a Director of International Sales and Growth Strategy at Simplex. My co-host, Mr. Brian Tormey, President of TitleVest, and myself would like to thank you for coming here tonight. We arranged a great lineup for you this evening, including keynote speaker, speech, and the Q&A session with Mr. Dan Garodnik, Chairman of the New York City Planning Commission. Mr. Garodnik, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you for coming. Then we will have a panel of developers to discuss the practical steps for locating development sites and utilizing the office to resi conversion plan. That's coming later. I'm confident that we will have a great time, and it will be an enlightening evening, valuable and fun. So allow me to briefly introduce Simplex. Thank you. So we are a diverse, let me press here. There we go. We are a diverse team of geoinformation specialists, software developers, data scientists, architects, real estate professionals, and even gamers, all united with a vision to transform the real estate ecosystem through the power of 3D and AI. Our global 3D SaaS platform is designed specially for real estate professionals, offering a comprehensive and innovative working tools and a wealth of enriched data layers that are carefully collected and presented. Recently, we began offering our global 3D platform in New York and Miami, where we forged a strategic partnership with the First American. This collaboration, along with First American, the acquisition of Envelope City, has now created a way to gain significant competitive edge. Obviously, our market research in New York quickly led us to Mayor Adams' City of Yes plan. We're happy to support this impressive plan, which aims to deal with the housing crisis around the city, boost the economy, and create interesting opportunity for the real estate, for the benefit of the real estate ecosystem. Now, let me guide you through a hypothetical scenario of one of the most interesting initiatives of the City of Yes, the Universal Affordability Preference, which allows to gain more building rights, build faster with less taxes. So we begin with our filtering tool to sift through the various data layers, highlighting properties that meet specific criteria. In this example, we can see that the platform just located over 25,000 lots that meet the UAP criteria we added. Once the relevant lots are found, we can zoom in and conduct a detailed digital site search at this specific address. With few clicks, we can adjust the site's area according to the new regulation from the City of Yes. We can accurately measure, pan, and view this site as if we had a drone in our pocket, released anywhere all the time. Now, we can simply turn on relevant data layers, such as point of interest, transportation, last transactions, zoning, any data layers that you wish to view around the area that you chose. That's the zoning one. A standout feature that we have is in the platform is the ability to position a virtual observer on any floor and experience a realistic view from that point. Not only that we can see the present view, we can also see the future view. We can simulate future views by turning on permits layer and view how new construction might completely change the landscape in few years, hence mitigate risks. In addition to that, we can quickly perform a shadow analysis to understand how sunlight would interact with the new building and its surrounding. Recognizing that a real estate project involves multiple stakeholders, we designed our platform to act as a collaborative canvas with user-friendly sharing tools to create a workspace where all perspectives meet and informed decisions are made more efficiently. That's it. If you want to hear more, we are here and we can show you more of Simplex. So now I will hand it over to you, Brian, to present the envelope, First American.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Round of applause from me. Thank you, good sir. Oh, I didn't know we were doing weightlifting too at the same time. Do I have to move one of these? What do I do? Yes? No? Okay. So my name is Brian Tormey. I'm the Northeast Regional Manager for First American Title, and I run and president of a company called TitleVest that I sold into First American a couple of years ago. I love what I do. I get to do title insurance. If you don't know what title insurance is, come see me afterwards and I'll explain it. But suffice to say, if you're doing a real estate deal here in the US, you're getting title insurance on that. That's really our core business. But along the way, we've innovated in a number of different ways and created some cool technology and proprietary solutions for the New York real estate ecosystem. And in that zone, we had years ago created something called Sightline that was a three-dimensional GIS-based world of New York City that could allow and sort of give that sightline analysis from any property. In doing that, we got close and friendly with a company called Envelope that was built out principally by some founders in the shop architecture firm, and then a handful of other great technicians and parties that came to support that company. This last year, we were fortunate enough to purchase Envelope as a company, and we're going to do a little video in a second. Amit, I'm going to ask for the clicker. Wonderful. This is from the day, I'm old enough to remember the days when they clicked, when they really had clicks to them. So we bought this company, and what it allows us to do is much similar to what Amit did. Let's see if I'm successful. Okay, great. It allows us to look and find sites around New York City that meet your zoning requirements. So this afternoon, I was sitting with a developer and their team, and they were looking for specific criteria. Everything from we don't want rent-stabilized tenants in it, we don't want landmark, we don't want government-owned, we don't want this, but we do want this many square feet, and we want this much adjacency of transferable development rights. We do want this specific use. We want it located this proximate to subways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're able to do is help take the nearly 1 million parcels of New York City and filter it down to your specific development goals. We've created this and taken it in buying the company Envelope and made it a very cost-effective and affordable site search type program. Again, we'll talk about it later. Come chat if you're interested in it. And so this site search allows us to sort of find different parcels that meet all kinds of criteria. We have helped some hospitals, we've helped developers in the residential zone, special use retail, a whole handful of different projects. And with that, we are excited to sort of be able to then pivot over to the massing tool, which you'll see here in a second. And what the massing tool allows us to do is to look at a specific parcel that you've identified or create an assemblage of parcels. And in creating that assemblage of parcels, understand what can be built there as of right. So right now we have built into the Envelope all the current zoning rules, but we have little knobs and controls in the massing tool that allow us to, and now we're going to go over to the massing tool, that allow us to actually jump, and we can go look at any one individual site as if it's already City of Yes is passed, because it's going to, right, sir? That's right. Who here thinks City of Yes should pass? I didn't hear anything. Come on, who here thinks City of Yes should pass? Okay, there we go. Now we got some excitement coming into Dan. So what we were able to do is sort of play around with that site, transfer development rights into the parcel and shape it and see it, and then take that. We are not replacing architects. We're not replacing zoning attorneys at all. We're just here to help give that quick analysis and help understand a site with some insights and things that you see here. And then if this site meets your criteria and you're like, oh, this is the thing that we want to do with it, we're able to help you export all those different file types. And I'll pause here. And export those file types over to your architect and your zoning attorney to help them continue the analysis. So that's the very quick skinny on the Envelope. I've got a handful of team members here. Anyone that says TitleVest, we're excited to talk to you about it. And so thank you, everyone. Yep, Courtney's waving in the back. Thank you again to our partners with Simplex for helping put on this amazing event, and even more so to Dan for being here and speaking to you all about the impressive. I've gotten to see Dan talk about this before in a nice intimate setting, and it's pretty cool, all the inner workings and thought process going into City of Yes, and there's so much work and effort, and we thank you and are appreciative for that sweat equity that you put into a plan that is going to dramatically reshape New York. I hear that he's made sure that there is we are going to build skyscrapers across all of Queens, but not near his favorite Riverside Park. That's going to stay exactly as it is right now. But Queens is just, I'm kidding. It is a very beautiful, even spread of development stuff. With that, Dan, why don't you come tell them not the lies I'm saying about City of Yes? Why don't you come tell them some truths?
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for having me, and I am really honored to be here to share a little bit about the work that we're doing at the Department of City Planning and next week at the City Planning Commission when we will be voting on City of Yes for housing opportunity. This is a big moment for New York and a big moment for all New Yorkers who today are struggling with the cost of housing. The fact that we do not have housing in New York City that suits our needs, it's not an issue that is just materialized, just has not sprung up on us in a moment. This is a problem that is decades in the making. We have, in the last decade, created about 800,000 jobs and about 200,000 homes. In the last 40 years, we created homes about half the rate that we did in the prior 40 years, at a time we actually lost population in New York City. So we have a moment where we really need to act. And the failure to do so, of course, is represented in a shockingly low vacancy rate in housing at 1.41%. It is the lowest vacancy rate that we have seen in New York since 1968. And people feel that. When you have low vacancy like that, every New Yorker feels that. The cost of rent, gentrification pressures, displacement, homelessness, measured on one day at the count in December, we had 93,000 homeless New Yorkers. A third of them were kids. We have an issue here. Now, we are also taking a big bite out of this issue, and we're trying to do it in a way which has not been attempted before ever in New York City's history, and to do this through zoning, to make changes to enable a little bit more housing in every neighborhood, which in the aggregate will actually create a significant number of units for New York City without creating the sorts of dramatic impacts that people frequently fear in neighborhoods when considering change. So no, we are not putting the Empire State Building in Douglaston, Queens. We are not doing things that do not match existing character of neighborhoods around New York City, but we have been very deliberate to try to create something that is a little bit everywhere so it doesn't have dramatic impacts that tax our infrastructure or are the sorts of things that communities tend to worry about. Now, let me just give you a quick overview. I could talk about this for an hour, but I'm going to talk about it in about 3 minutes. Here's what it is. We have proposals that relate to our low-density areas, so think anything from a single-family home to modest multifamily housing all throughout New York City, to our medium and high-density areas, think right here. For low-density areas, we want to give homeowners the opportunity to use their own space a little more creatively. 800 square feet on your lot for an accessory dwelling unit, in your attic, in your basement, in your garage, in your backyard, we think is a good thing for homeowners. It's worked in lots of places around the country. New York homeowners should have that opportunity too. And by the way, it is a great way for 1 and 2 family homes to be able to add a little bit more housing in those neighborhoods. Also, in low density areas, we want to allow for what we call town center zoning. So you take a commercial strip, a commercial corridor where you have a single story of commercial businesses, a coffee shop next to a laundromat, next to a doctor's office, with nothing above it. We think that's a great place for 3 stories of housing, 4 stories of housing, 5 stories of housing, absolute maximum. And it depends on the zoning district. It depends on what the surrounding context is. We think that is a good thing to do there. By the way, that is a very much well-recognized form of housing in New York City. You see 3, 4, 5-story buildings all over the place in New York City. They frequently predate the 1961 zoning resolution, which of course is what we are trying to amend now. Legalizing those sorts of buildings, which are well recognized and embraced sorts of buildings that already exist. Also, transit-oriented development. Within a half mile of transit on specific lots that are bigger size lots on the short end of a block or on a wide street, we think you should be able to do that same sort of modest, what we call missing middle type apartment building. Okay, that's the low density stuff in a nutshell. The medium and high density stuff, you saw it already. The bonus for affordable housing, the universal affordability preference. So in our zoning districts that are medium and high density, R6 to R10, we want to give an incentive for affordable housing. So essentially, you get 20% more, that 20% is all permanently affordable housing. We think that's a good deal for everybody. It furthers our policy goals, and we expect that that will generate a significant number of new units. Okay, now some citywide stuff. Office to residential conversions. It's gotten a lot of attention. Why has it gotten a lot of attention? Well, we have about a 19% vacancy rate in our commercial office buildings and a 1.41% vacancy rate in our housing. So people look at that and appropriately say, okay, well, we should probably let some offices convert to housing, and they are right. So the primary obstacles to that relate to regulatory, they relate to the financial structure of individual buildings, tax incentives, the physical structure of the buildings, and the dates of eligibility. We're changing all of these things to make it more possible and more easy for buildings to convert from office to residential. I'll close with this final highlight because everybody has an opinion on the subject of parking. We propose to do away with what are existing mandates in our zoning resolution as to the precise minimum number of parking spaces that you need to include in every development, in every community district, in every neighborhood of the city. This comes out of the 1950s, 1960s when cars were everything. Everything had to be defined first by cars and second by the homes that you're creating. Today, we have found that our own parking mandates are actually doing harm for the creation of housing in places where, a developer reasonably may not want or need to offer parking, like right on top of a subway station. We don't need to do that. So we say here, let's eliminate the mandate, let's stop creating a conflict between parking and housing, and say, if you have parking in your building today, fine, keep it. You want to include parking in your development tomorrow after this passes? Okay, go for it. If you don't want to, that's okay too. So this allows us to have a much more flexible and nuanced approach. Places that actually, there are a lot of places in the United States that have done away with mandatory parking requirements, and we have found that they, more often than not, continue to produce parking, particularly where it's needed. Buffalo is a great example of that. Did away with their parking mandate. 83% of the new developments continue to offer off-street parking, even though there's no mandate. I can tell you from personal experiences, as somebody who chairs the City Planning Commission, we frequently see people coming in to get relief from the requirement. They spend a couple $100,000 in a couple years of time. You can tell me if I'm missing on the price tag for that. I may be way off, but that's my best estimate. Call it a couple $100,000 in a couple years of time to get relief from the mandate in places where they don't need to provide parking. And at the same time, we see lots of circumstances which people go well above the minimums. Okay. So we're going to create a little bit more flexibility here. That's what that's designed to do. This proposal, in sum, will create about 100,000 units of housing over the next 15 years. An important moment for us. City Planning Commission is voting on this next Wednesday. A short time after that, we will refer it over to the City Council. They will be on a clock. This will have a vote. We are calling the question on housing in New York City, and we are doing it this year. This is a big moment for all of us. So, I appreciate the intro and rallying the crowd. Thank you on support of City of Yes. It's really an important moment for the city. There's going to be a hearing at the City Council. There's a lot of people who do not want to see change. And I would encourage those who, are able to see the critical nature of a proposal like this and the importance for us to take action to make your voices heard. These sorts of things don't pass themselves, let's say, and we have a 51-member city council, which of course I was a member of until 2017, by the way. I served 12 years in the city council representing this very district we are standing in right now. And so we have to make our case. It's incumbent upon us to show up and to make sure that people understand what it's about, why it's important. So with that, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Let's see if we get this thing on. So thank you for that, Chair Gorodnik. I guess we'll start this. We'll get to audience questions in a bit, but on a couple of points. On the one hand, there's a bit of mixed messaging, I think. On the one hand, we have a 1.41% vacancy rate. We have a housing crisis. We need more housing. But a lot of the messaging around City of Yes talks about the idea of a little bit in every neighborhood, not all that dramatic, right? The estimates, I think, in the environmental, there's something like 100,000 units over 10, 15 years. Are there types of developments or particular areas that we think City of Yes is going to jumpstart development?
Right. So this is a really important question. Today, you all know we have 59 community boards in New York City. Community districts divided by geography. Last year, 10 of those community boards produced as much housing as the other 49 combined. So when you consider that fact, and by the way, this is not a blame anybody situation. This is just the reality. This is where we are in New York City. There are 10 community boards that are producing as much housing as the other 49 combined, and the end result is we don't have enough housing. Okay. So we need to open the door. We need to open the door a crack. We need to open the door respectfully. And that is what we're proposing to do. So where do we expect to see it? Well, you're going to see a little bit in every neighborhood. And that's exactly how it's designed to be. And by the way, I will note that when you make zoning changes like this, they are designed to be diffuse and long-standing. We are, after all, talking about a zoning resolution that was passed in 1961. So if we are lucky here and we are able to make our case and make these changes today, they will stand till 2084 and beyond. That's exactly what they are supposed to do. And of course, you will see things that happen a little bit in all corners, and that's what it's supposed to do.
And so this year we saw, though, a lot of activity also at the state level around housing creation. Is City of Yes, the thing that's really going to open the door to housing, or do we need more from the state, from the federal government, from industry to really get this moving?
So this is not the solution to all challenges here. This is a big bite out of the problem. But yes, you need to row the boat in the same direction at a variety of different levels. I will say, and it's really worth taking a moment to recognize what we saw the state of New York do in this calendar year as it relates to housing and as it relates to New York City's own priorities. Not only did we get a renewal of an incentive program, which of course was not a foregone conclusion before the session. We got a tax incentive for the purpose of incentivizing office to residential conversions with an affordable housing component. We got the state to lift, after decades of advocacy, the state to lift the cap on residential FAR in New York City. And of course, what I'm referring to is New York State had a strict limit on how much residential density you could have on any single site. And that limit was 12. It was an old rule designed to limit what they called vertical slums, not meaningful to us in 2024. The state did away with it, and through a lot of hustle by the city of New York to make all of that happen. They also gave us an opportunity to pilot some legalization of basement apartments throughout the city. So these were really big changes that the state of New York and big tools that the state of New York gave us, and now it's incumbent on us, of course, to make good use of them.
So talking about office conversions, pandemic now, what, 4 years out, everyone's been talking about needing to do this. Everyone wants to do it, initiative after initiative to do it. Still feels in a lot of ways that we're kind of at square one when it comes to getting those off the ground. And yet you spoke about a lot of the challenges that are there that are just inherent to the buildings, to the financing structure, some state action that has come there. But also, a while back, the city announced that as part of this accelerator program, which was also designed to bring agencies together and do this, that 69 buildings have reached out to this accelerator program expressing interest. Can you tell us a little more about what that means? How interested? How far along are they? What's holding them up?
Okay, so here, the primary challenge for office to residential conversion today, putting aside what you've got in the building, how occupied you are, the physical shape of the building, your appetite for risk, your access to capital, all of the things that are a factor for you as a single building owner. The issues that relate to New York City and New York State government relate to the fact that we have certain areas of New York City which you are not allowed to do an office to residential conversion. We have certain areas of the city, like this one that we are in right now, where if your building was not built before 1961, you are not able to do an office to residential conversion. So we want to make that easier. We want to change the date of eligibility. By the way, it's 1961 here. In Lower Manhattan, it's 1977. The geography is really Manhattan plus downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, a couple of other areas, but it is not citywide. So we want to change the date of eligibility from 1961 or 1977 to 1991. We want to broaden the geography, make it citywide, allow you to convert office to residential, but also to allow you to convert other types of buildings to residential. If residential is allowed there, we want to allow you to take advantage, to be able to take advantage of the city's adaptive reuse rules there too. We, on offices alone, by making these changes, it would enable another 136 million square feet of office space to be eligible to convert. We don't expect 136 million square feet to convert, but it's more square footage of office space than even exists in the city of Philadelphia, just to put that into some context. And we expect another 20,000 units of housing to come out of it. The folks who have, the accelerator is there for those who are looking to figure out how to navigate New York City's processes to the extent you're eligible today, and to give you a jump start to think about what you can do as quickly as possible once these rule changes are in effect. So you are correct to say we've been talking about it because the pandemic feels both a long time away, but also really isn't that long ago. And these rule changes have taken a little time to formulate. Well, we are here now. We're going to have this vote this fall, and these rule changes will be enabled, we hope, if this passes, within 3 months of, 3 months of the moment that we are sitting in now. So we are at the end of the line for this process, and to be able to allow a lot more buildings to be eligible to convert.
Thanks. And pivoting a little bit away from housing for a minute and talking about some of the other pieces of City of Yes that came in, kind of got lost a bit in the shuffle, I think, with City of Yes for M districts and some of the work over there. And just this broader question of the developer community thinking about these sites and what is the future of it, because you look at 1961, when these zoning maps were written, New York City had about plus or minus 1 million industrial jobs. Today, that number's about 60,000. Last I saw these numbers. For a while there, you saw a lot of these neighborhoods being rezoned to residential. Then there started to be there's increasing pushback against that. The city planning this week announced the beginning of the NYC industrial plan. And we've had all kinds of zoning rules over the last couple of years that kind of, in some ways, I don't want to say, pick at what the industry has found to be the most valuable uses in M districts, but in a lot of ways, that's what it feels like with first self-storage spaces, hotels, now talk about last mile warehouses. Broadly speaking, what is, as we have a housing shortage, but we also want to protect industry, but we also don't quite know what that looks like. What is the future of the M districts in the city?
Right, so this is the question that we have now embarked on answering, and I cannot answer it as we have this conversation now because we are in the midst of what will be a year and change of asking the core questions of what must we preserve as New York City as it relates to industrial, what is properly designated as a manufacturing zone, what is properly designated with a tax benefit as an industrial business zone. These are questions which really have not been looked at for 20 years plus. And so we at the Department of City Planning are taking a crack at that with a plan to make some recommendations by the end of next year. Now, I will say that the City of Yes for Housing is one of 3 initiatives that we have advanced at the Department of City Planning. The first 2 already passed the City Council. The first was on carbon neutrality and was designed to make it easier for buildings to go green, make it easier for us to further our environmental policy goals as a city by getting zoning out of the way. Like, you want to put solar on your rooftop, like, let's not create an absolute maximum of 25% of your rooftop that should be covered by solar panels, for example. Or in our second City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, which did touch manufacturing zones, so many of our rules, which were written in 1961, at this point were just laughably outdated and called out things like typewriter repair shops and airline ticketing offices, model car hobby shops, I can go on. And, no reference to modern manufacturing, 3D printing, for example, not something that was easily recognized in zoning. And in fact, a 3D printer, under prior rules would have been a manufacturing use only and could not have been located even in a commercial office building. We changed those rules. We changed those rules with an eye toward modernizing zoning to allow for a combination of modern manufacturing and also changed certain zoning designations to allow for growth even in manufacturing districts. But this conversation is at the beginning. We've made some changes, but this is at the beginning as we commence our study of manufacturing industrial districts and thinking about the future.
I, have a long list of stuff that I can sit and pick your brain on this and some pet talks, but I think I know there's a couple of microphones around. We have questions from the audience. Got one back there. We've got a question over here. Oh, we got a mic coming. Just make sure that you have a mic.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Roman. I've actually heard you speak before, Mr. Garodnik, at the Brooklyn Law School, I think. I think you speak there? Yeah. Plug for them. They do free events, and they have good speakers. I go. It's a very good place to learn about things going on in the city. So I read some of these pamphlets that I think your office was behind that go district by district and outline sort of what the changes each district could expect. I looked at the ones in Brooklyn, and I actually wrote about them in a newsletter that I do. And you identified these low-density districts across the city in these pamphlets. You know what I'm referring to, right? The ones and they're in light blue, dark blue, and you identify these zones as areas of, raising the zoning because they're too low density. And I was just wondering what kind of FAR changes one might expect from those changes across the city.
Right. So let me note what we're talking about here. We have put out on our website, really important, trying to be a useful tool, what you might expect in any neighborhood. Zoning is very wonky. It's very complicated. I'm pointing to something. I'm pointing to David and Dan Gorodnik over here. Wonky, complicated. And so we want to try to make it easy for people to figure out where these rule changes might be applicable. Now, when you look at a chart which says, it's all blue or it's all red or whatever, it really is defining where the opportunity might exist. It does not mean to say that something definitely will happen there. Because in zoning, we just control the dial. We are the enabling statute for opportunity in land use. And it is the sort of thing which allows for people to make decisions that we hope they will make. The types of changes of density that we actually are making in low density districts are extremely modest. Extremely modest. And they relate to a smidge of FAR, a little bit more room in a building envelope, a little bit more opportunity on a lot, an ADU. Those are the sorts of changes that we're talking about. In the town center or transit-oriented development context, we're talking about the sorts of changes that would allow for, let's say, a 3-story apartment building, 30 feet, 35 feet. You don't need to add a whole lot of density to make that happen. You just need to eliminate some obstacles in zoning that today are keeping it from happening. A parking requirement, a rear yard requirement. Without some of those things, you actually can build above a commercial corridor in a low density district. So the long and the short of it is, depends on the area. The reason we put out those neighborhood maps is to try to give people the best sense of what we are enabling in their neighborhood, recognizing that, of course, just because we're enabling it, doesn't mean day one that all of a sudden a building goes up. It is our hope, it is our expectation that over 15 years we will see 100,000 units of housing spread out across the vast geography of New York City. But that, of course, is, it's going to be very modest in any one neighborhood.
All right, I think we have some questions down there.
Hi, Dan. How are you? Hi. Hello. Hi, how are you? Eric Benaim. I'm based in Long Island City. I know aside from the city of Yes, you also have a ULURP going on in Long Island City, which is a big deal for everybody in Long Island City. Part of that ULURP, you're rezoning some commercial areas, some residential areas, but then there's also an IBZ zone. And the IBZ zone is basically sandwiched between like Queensbridge housing and like the rest of Long Island City. So there's no continuity between Long Island City core and Queensbridge housing. I know you said you're going to be looking into it probably by the end of next year, but I think if there's any place where you can make a real impact is that core IBZ zone where it's just natural to rezone it and include it as part of the current ULURP. Is it something would you guys reconsider, or is it something you're just going to think about it down the line later on, or?
So this is a good and important question, and we understand the point that you're making about an IBZ that's sandwiched between two otherwise residential areas, or one residential area and a future residential area. We also are about to embark on a thoughtful study of IBZ's industrial policy for the city. So we don't want to put the cart before the horse here to be able to make a change here before we have thought through the potential implications for that citywide. I will note, it has been longstanding policy that you don't do residential in IBZs. And that's been the way it has been for at least 20 years, if not longer. And so we are committed to looking at the question, as you pointed out, and we want to think about this thoughtfully for the city. But what we want to do is we want it to be part of a process. We want it to be part of our citywide strategy here. and to make sure that it works, whatever we do, works in the broader context.
Yes, okay. I'm Aaron Yassin with Hive Developers. We're focused mostly on developing in R6 and R7 districts in Brooklyn. And I've combed through the proposed zoning resolution along with my architect, and we cannot find within the zoning resolution any relaxation of parking regulations related to R6 and R7 zoning. Can you tell me where I could find that? Like where is this written in? Because the parking, particularly on the size properties that we're looking at, is really challenging, creates real problems.
We can follow up with you. I'll give you my card after. The reason why you may not find it in R6 or R7 specifically is because we're doing away with it everywhere. So you may be looking for it in the wrong section. Like we just do away with it. We do away with it. We are doing away with the mandates in all residential districts in the zoning resolution. That certainly would include R6 and R7. So we're going to figure it out. We're going to make sure that you're looking in the right spot, but it is definitely in there.
Fantastic. Great to hear.
Hi, Ritu Sahib Architecture. So our bread and butter is adaptive reuse. So glad to hear the changes you're making. It's also small family additions. I heard you say keeping in the character of the neighborhood. So is that a code word for landmarks is going to get more stringent, continue? Do we have some understanding with the landmarks that if zoning permits it, the landmarking is not going to be so stringent? Because the way I see it, when these townhouses and buildings were built in 1899, and when they talked about the modern man in 2024, they didn't think we'd be using these masonry and wood joist structures, according to me. So is landmarking have the same vision as the New York Planning Commission does?
So let's just talk about what the law says and what the law will say, and put aside what anybody's vision is. This does not do away with any landmarks. It does not change the rules as to what a landmark building can do absent an approval from the Landmarks Commission. And so it was not intended to be code for protecting landmarks, but in fact, we don't touch landmarks in this plan, except to make it easier for landmarks to transfer their unused development rights. That is something we do in this plan today. We have a very onerous special permit process, which allows you as a landmark building owner to transfer your air rights next door, across the street, and that's it. And it has only been used about a dozen times in the last 50 years. It is not a well-used special permit because it's onerous, expensive. Landmarks frequently don't have the resources to be able to do that work. We will allow for a lower threshold of review, so not a special permit. It'll be either a certification of the chair of the City Planning Commission or authorization of the commission itself. And we will allow for a broader transferability. It's easier to describe on a map, but not just across the street or next door, but if you can picture an entire block face, it would be across the street or next door to anything on that block face. So if you're on the next corner and across the street, you'd be able to transfer there. So that's the way in which we enable more flexibility for a landmark building, but nothing that we do here trumps landmark designation or historic landmark designation.
All right, so I know that we have a lot more to talk about tonight, and so for those who want to look at housing opportunity, I must say the Department of City Planning has done a really phenomenal job of putting together information about this plan, which is not something we've always seen, to try to make zoning a little more esoteric. I see some of the other zoning lawyers, not so great for us. We like it better when we're the wizards that know zoning and no one else does, but we appreciate it nonetheless as we do the really hard work from all the staff at the department. And so, Chair Gorodnick, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Just really quick, last question.
Thanks for having me.
Our session tonight coming up. We've got a couple chairs coming. Well, I mean, Dan was a chair. but he's an amazing kind of chair. We've got a couple other seating chairs coming up, as well as our panel. There are the seating chairs. There we go. Ooh, I get my chance to move furniture. Excellent. Excellent. I can be buff like a meat. So I hope everyone is enjoying the night. What we've got lined up is we've got our panel. Panelists, please do be coming on up. Come on up. And Kiara is going to be here to introduce them. She's here somewhere. I know I saw her before. There, she's coming in from over here. Grab a seat. And then after this session, we have downstairs a wonderful little spread at the sort of the bar-type restaurant setup downstairs. So we hope everyone stays through and enjoys the panel and then gets a chance to talk through all this stuff and come chat with some of our panelists down at the event downstairs. Okay, with that, I think I have a microphone for you, ma'am.
Thank you. Hi, how is everyone? That's not a response. How are you doing? That's better. My name is Kira. I'm a reporter with BizNow. For those of you who don't know BizNow, we are a media and events company for the commercial real estate sector. I'm one of the New York City reporters, so if you read BizNow, you've probably read my work. If you don't read BizNow, you should because it's free. With that, I am delighted to introduce Melissa Birch from the New York City Economic Development Corporation.
Thank you. All right, thank you.
Scott Metzner from Janus Property. And Eli Weiss from Joy Construction. We are going to be talking about City of Yes and economic development. So let's get started. So I guess the first question I have, and the best place to start probably, is maybe with you, Melissa. What do you think the biggest development priorities are for the city today, and how will City of Yes impact that?
Great. Great question for us to kick off, and that was really phenomenal by Chair Gorodnick. You won't be surprised to know that as the EDC, so we're the city's Economic Development Corporation, we stand at the intersection of business and government, focused on creating jobs and investment flowing into New York City. We've been laser focused since we came into office at working with agency partners and with the state on what was called the New New York Action Plan. Which was a series of 40 recommendations put together with a whole public-private partnership mindset. So working with academic partners, real estate partners, business partners, technology partners to create a set of actionable recommendations that actually have been the guide for our work. You heard Dan talk about office to residential conversion. That was called for in this plan. We now have a mechanism that is enabling these projects to move forward, and still a little bit more work to do on the zoning side. One of the key things was creating the city's first public realm czar. We know that having a vibrant and engaging public realm is so critical to answering the question, if you can work from anywhere, why work from here? Why work from New York City? Why work from Midtown? We need an engaging district that is more of a social district, that is vibrant, and that has a mixture of uses. And the last thing I wanted to highlight from that's been a big focus for us is on how do we also go about modernizing office. We have not given up on the office. I love this building and the fact that we're sitting here today, because this building is a case in point of what can be created when you reinvest and reimagine into something that is, quite frankly, an aging office building, Class B, no longer. This place is hopping, it is buzzing. That ground floor and that lobby was phenomenal, and it's like that all the time. I come into this building all the time whenever I'm going in and out of Grand Central. So we have a program called MCORE, which is Manhattan Commercial Revitalization Program, which is about giving tax abatements and economic assistance to office owners that want to take their Class B and make it a Class A. So I encourage everyone to look at that. That's been a huge priority. We also have, we're not stopping there because we are a 5-borough economic development agency. So we are focused on all 5 boroughs. I just touched on things that hit on Manhattan, but I'll highlight before I pause and just say that we've had a lot of action as well in Brooklyn. Folks will probably have heard that we had a very significant takeover, one of the largest land transactions that's occurred in the history of New York City. The EDC gained control of the Red Hook Container Terminal from the New Jersey, New York Port Authority, and we are envisioning that 122 acres as a hub of modern maritime waterfront activities, and as well as housing, community amenities, waterfront access. That's just 122 acres in a whole collection of campuses that the EDC is already in the process of redeveloping on the South Brooklyn waterfront. So making progress across these key initiatives has been some of our priorities, and I hope we get to more of them as we continue.
Thank you. Scott, I think you're up next. I mean, I'm curious kind of, I guess, what you're working on in New York right now and how you think City of Yes is going to impact some of those developments.
Sure. So we're working on a multi-acre master planned mixed-use project in West Harlem. That's our biggest project, just between Columbia University's expansion and the City College campus. And we consider that an innovation triangle, a district that is being driven by everything going on in those two campuses, as well as the hospital complex that's just to the north. And what we're trying to do is enmesh that into the community. And so we're working with not only the universities, but with private industry and startups, and with local not-for-profits and local entrepreneurs, and with people like Melissa and EDC, as well as the state of New York. I think that what Dan is doing, what city planning is doing, the City of Yes, is an incredibly bold and sort of long-needed relook at the city, and at one of the mechanisms that people like I and developers are looking at. And I think also, you know, what everybody here, if they know Melissa or Dan, we're all very lucky to have people like them in roles of leadership in New York, who are amazing public servants. But I think, as Dan pointed out, and those of us in the development world realize that you know, zoning is playing with the dials, and it's one of the tools in the toolbox. I think from our seat right now, what are we working on? You know, we're working on trying to stay here tomorrow. There is, you know, the two big pictures in our world are sort of the, you know, massive mark to market that's going on, and with that sort of accessibility to capital. And I think in the housing world, and our friends at Rosenberg and Estes on the prior panel, you know, there is a regulatory environment, I think in particular with housing, that is, in my, you know, opinion, largely to blame for this shortage of housing in New York City. And there are two sides to that. You know, one is the investment in ownership of housing, and we are also affordable housing developers and owners, which can be put aside because certainly that created some issues that were not positive for tenants in neighborhoods and cities. But I think the development of housing, at the end of the day, if you can't make money developing housing, let alone owning housing long term, then what we've witnessed, and by the way, we also support tenant activist groups, and I'm a longtime board member of one of the largest not-for-profit developers in the city, so it's not just from the for-profit side, but I think we've witnessed sort of a quiet quitting by the development community. So we can all talk about this incredible demand for housing, and the fact that, and it's not just poor people who are having trouble finding housing, it's, you know, affordable with a small a cuts across all income categories, I think, in New York. And so somehow we need the political strength to look at this regulatory environment, and so that's something that I'm involved with as well, and we hope to do more housing. We certainly hope to you know, work with the city and continue to grow the life sciences industry, and we're big believers in working in offices and back to work, and I agree that being in Midtown, being in this building, seeing the crowd turn out on Tuesday night, all good things.
That's a good segue into my question for Eli, which is, again, similar question to what we've been talking about so far. How do you think City of Yes is going to affect your work, which is largely in, you know, affordable and workforce housing?
So I think the first thing that, I mean, not to criticize, I wouldn't have called it the city of yes, because a lot of people ask, what are they saying yes to? What was being said no to? I think the best way, and Chairman Garodnick said it best, we have a zoning resolution from before the Civil Rights Act was passed in this country. I mean, it is so outdated, right? When people keep asking me what's yes, what's no, I think what it is we have a set of rules that governs the way we build, that governs the way we deliver product to the market, that is completely disconnected from current times. So I think one of the things we have to realize is this is not a response to no, this is a modernization. This isn't anything that we're sweeping changes and criticisms. This is just a modernization. That said, obviously in today's political environment, nothing is for sure. We've seen in housing over the last few years 421A expire, and now it came back as 485X. We've seen a lot of policies that we thought were a given change on us. So I haven't penciled it in yet completely, but obviously anything that makes things easier to develop affordable housing. I think you said it really best, that we have a really serious housing shortage, and to dig deeper into how acute of a shortage it is, New York lost people since COVID. So think about that. We're a state that lost people and we're still short on housing. So that just goes to show you, if we intend to take advantage of all the great work that people like Scott are doing and Melissa are doing, we're going to have this vibrant Midtown. If we're losing people and we don't have housing, imagine when they start to come. So I think any type of zoning or any type of legislation that can create housing and be creative, people's homes, garages, is welcomed by the development community.
I do have to push back a little on the "we lost people" statement. I'm sorry. We lost people in the first 6 months of the pandemic, but by the time those 6 months were over, most people had come back, if that was why they left. In the years since, we've seen a lot more people come to New York, young graduates, people coming back for a lot of different reasons. But point stands, housing shortage, big deal. I am curious, again, I think you're probably a good person to answer this, and Scott, maybe you can pitch in as well. But, we have obviously this housing shortage, but at the same time we have City of Yes, which is going to make zoning more flexible. And we also had some incentives passed at the state level this year in Albany. One of the things that you and I have spoken about a little bit in the past, Eli, is, over the last couple of years, between where the capital markets are and sort of how difficult it can be to build here, you've seen sort of market rate developers come more into the affordable housing space. Is that something that you expect to see continue? If so, why? If not, why not?
I think Scott said it very well. At the end of the day, people look for businesses in which they can make a living. And when you look at the statistics behind affordable housing, if I build a building with 100 units, I could sometimes get 70,000 to 80,000 applications. That's encouraging as a business person to say, there's demand for my product. We also have a huge opportunity to revitalize NYCHA, which I'm not sure people know. And again, I'm already wrong with one population thing, but I've heard that the entire city of Boston's population could fit in to NYCHA. And so there's a huge opportunity there. So it's really about opportunities. And I think over the last few years, many of us woke up and realized that easy capital and easy money is very cyclical, and just as easy as it comes, it can go out. And affordable housing is typically something where most of the funding is subsidized. And so it's a little bit easier to gain capital. So yeah, I do think based on the need, based on the capitalization stack, there'll definitely be more demand for developers to look to do that.
Yeah, I think I can jump on that also. Anything that allows more housing to be built will hopefully lead to more housing. But I think when you talk about affordable housing with a capital A, if city planning rezoned all 5 boroughs, to have every lot, in all 5 boroughs have a 100-story housing, affordable housing or housing lot, it takes subsidy. So, subsidy is what makes it affordable. So the City of New York Department of Housing Preservation and Development, which is a very large budget and has, through many mayors created, a huge amount of affordable housing, has a limit to how much it can support and subsidize housing. So I think, in addition to all the good things that are being done, whether it's in zoning or whether what HPD is doing, we need more and more bold ideas about, what it takes to incentivize the private sector to create housing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that last statement. There is not enough government money to be able to solve the housing crisis. You don't chip away at this unless you are activating the private marketplace. I think affordable housing has been very attractive for people because of the risk profile. It's a very different risk profile, but it is 100% funded by government. So there are limits to those budgets, and we're seeing the limits of them. I mean, the past couple of years have been some of the highest affordable housing production that's occurred in the history of New York City, and we still have we still have a housing crisis. And that's because we need to be generating more housing overall and more affordable housing and leveraging the marketplace to do that. That's where tax incentives come in. Two really important tax incentives passed in Albany earlier in this session. One is 467M, which is the office to residential conversion incentive, which provides a 25-year tax abatement when you introduce 25% affordable housing as a part of that. You're not required to add affordable housing. You can elect to do it and receive the abatement. The other is the replacement program to 421A, which is known as 485X. And I did want to, in the theme of, and to quote the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development, Maria Torres Springer, who is critical in the work of economic development, she talks about, and who oversees our housing agencies, she talks about the need for everything, everywhere, all at once. And what she means by that is that there's not one tool, and you heard that from Dan Gorodnick. It's not City of Yes, and then we've solved housing. No, it's City of Yes. It's office to residential conversion. It's, as of right incentives. It's another tool I wanted to mention. In addition to neighborhood rezonings, which we heard about the question about Long Island City, there's 5 large neighborhood rezonings happening right now. But the other thing I wanted to call out is that there is now an executive order to look at all publicly owned sites and to evaluate them for housing. So let me give you an example of that in action. There are, and we saw some of the tools actually at the beginning of this forum here, Simplex and Envelope, that you can use to look at government sites. Those are being very critically evaluated now as suitable for, in some instances, a relocation of government uses that are already existing on the site in order to enable housing redevelopment. We are doing this right now in many places across our portfolio. The EDC is hard at work integrating jobs and housing together. We're doing that at Willets Point, where we are creating a whole new neighborhood. We are 800 units into a 2,500 unit, 100% affordable housing commitment. So in this instance, it is all government subsidized. But the interesting part of it is that we have also been able to attract a $1 billion investment into a new soccer facility, a new hotel complex that will complement that neighborhood. New schools and open spaces will also be delivered as a part of that. This will be the first 100% privately financed sports facility in New York City. So I think it shows that we can really use government resources, whether land or subsidy, in many ways to catalyze and activate the private marketplace to invest, and that's really the critical component of this conversation.
That's another great segue into something I wanted to ask about. Right. You, prior to working for the EDC, worked with the developers who leveraged public-private partnerships to get things done. I'd love to hear a little bit about how that background informs how you approach your job now and how you think those sorts of partnerships are crucial to New York City's economic development going forward.
Thank you for that. Yes, I've been at the EDC as Chief Operating Officer for the last 2.5 years. I spent the previous 25 years in the private sector as a real estate developer and investor. I have always considered myself a civic developer. I got my roots at Forest City Ratner Companies in Brooklyn back in 2002, creating, entitling, assembling the land, and ultimately delivering on the creation of the Barclays Center in Brooklyn and 6,000 units of housing. About 2,000 of those are built and more to go. Projects, these are huge generational projects. They take a lot of time to happen. And one of the reasons why I really said yes to this role is the opportunity to create more sort of common language and understanding between the public and private sector. I think it's really important for the public sector to understand the risk factors that are embedded in private market activation. Capital needs a return. That is not a bad thing. Government also has its objectives. It's really looking to accomplish a lot when it undertakes a real estate transaction. It wants to not only see a building get built, but it wants to see, workforce, a local workforce activated. It wants to see the uses in that building really aligned with our innovation sector priorities and other strategic policies of the city. So there is a sort of a learning about what are the primary objectives of one to the other. And I often find that developers come in and, sometimes only want to talk about their returns, and they would really benefit from talking about their return, but also how their projects can meet more of a double or triple bottom line, which is ultimately an objective of the city. And the confluence of that is that I think the government and certainly the EDC, I think we've really been able to bring a more private sector facing approach. As we look to bring investment into the city, we need to understand that investment needs to be de-risked. There are some of those risks that the government is better suited and better poised to absorb in a time like this, and others that really are the obligation and responsibility of the private partners. So I think having a really honest dialogue about what risks there are and who is sort of best poised to absorb and benefit from that is a really healthy conversation, and one that I think has enabled us to unstick so many projects that were stuck in the mud before we showed up, and a lot of that has to do with the incredible support from City Hall, from Adams, from our deputy mayor, who has given us really the objective to drive investment into the city and to make sure that we are getting the ecosystem of real estate development and innovation moving. And we've seen some really strong results.
I have the opposite. I started in government, and now I'm in the private sector, and I can vouch for her project because I did your TEFRA hearing in 2005. I remember issuing the tax-exempt bonds for Melissa when she came in for that, so it's all true. But, look, I think in New York, you can't separate being in development and working with government. It just, whether you're submitting plans to DOB, you're not able to do that. And I think once you realize that any large-scale project, in terms of environmental reviews, in terms of every aspect is going to come down to some level of government interaction, you have to change your position on that. Obviously, the more complex an interaction the project is with government, whether it's financing, zoning. I worked on a project with EDC in Inwood where we put the waterfront park through my property, and we had a demapped street in the river that we had to do a ULURP to demap the street. We didn't realize that there was a street underwater in the East River. We couldn't see it, but that's more of a reflection of the East River. But the reality is most people don't understand that there's a flip side. And I think what Melissa is saying is now that she's there, she tries to explain that to developers. And because I was there, I sort of understand it myself, and I tell people, there is a flip side. There's a limit. As Scott said, government just can't write checks endlessly to create affordable housing. There are checks and balances. There are environmental reviews. There are certain things that people think the city controls, but actually the state controls. So really learning to navigate that in development is extremely important.
Anything to add, Scott?
I think that that covers it, and I don't want to beat a dead horse because I'm proud to, or dead, whatever the right phrase is, but I'm proud to be a double or triple bottom line developer. I believe in that, but I also believe that the role of the private sector is to have the discipline of the for-profit motive, and it's the role of the government to regulate and control that motive from getting out of hand. And I think that in housing in particular, which is has different issues obviously than commercial issues right now, I think the pendulum has swung too far to sort of a populist position of over-regulating, not only through the state, through the 2019 changes to the laws, but when you look at the burdens of maintaining and running housing today, the insurance environment, how real estate taxes and assessed values can keep going up at a time when most of us think the values of our real estate have dropped by 50 or 60%, or depending on what asset class you're in, maybe less than that. The cost of water and sewer taxes going. How does the who is going to step in and allow the private sector to do what the private sector should be doing? That's my but I'm all for public-private partnerships, and what we're doing today, we're intimately involved with the public sector. We value what the public sector brings to the table that we can't bring to the table, and as Eli said, it's not possible to touch a piece of New York City without being involved with the public sector.
Great. I want to move on to life sciences because I think that's another big part of the city's economic development plan. New York has taken a pretty big bet on life sciences in the last few years. There's the $1 billion Life Sci NYC funding initiative. There's the Kips Bay campus. One of the things that I've heard from people I talked to over the last couple of years is they have concerns around, a couple of years ago, VC capital started drying up, and that meant there were fewer opportunities for early stage startups and, some of the tenants who might be in some of these spaces. So I'm wondering if any of you can convince me why life sciences is still a really smart bet for economic development in New York City now.
I'm happy to take a crack at that. First, I just would like to give a little bit of framing to that $1 billion commitment and to talk about how, I know there have been some recent articles, and, there's one I think got sent to me 15 times from the Wall Street Journal, and I was a little bit like, I already knew that a year ago. So it felt a little bit like old news for those of us that are sort of living it. But the $1 billion commitment, and I think why it's really important to understand sort of the concept of ecosystem development as we think about economic development is so critical, is because some of that is tax incentives to create new buildings, lab buildings have so much specialized equipment and infrastructure. They really are it is not an office building with some, more high-tech fit out. It really is a very different type of building and system. And so lab buildings, which are about 4 or 5 million square feet today, we believe should double by 2030. So we're not talking some wildfire expansion, but we know that we're going to continue to build this ecosystem, and that's going to be an important part of it. And it's a chicken and an egg, where companies can't locate here unless the buildings exist. The buildings can't exist unless they can be leased, and certainly in this complicated financing environment, it's very hard to get a new building out of the ground without any significant pre-leasing. But also really critically important is the money that we're investing into building up a workforce as well as a translational R&D ecosystem. And let me talk about what I am saying in that comment, okay? So we have got number 2 in the US for National Institute of Health grants are flowing into New York City. We have some of the leading universities and research hospitals in the world. We're doing phenomenal basic research. We're doing phenomenal scientific discovery in New York City. It really is leading edge. Where we are not yet meeting the mark, and where Boston and San Francisco have had an advantage, is in translating the research and the scientific discovery out of the academic setting into the commercialized setting. So that leap and that connection is a lot about workforce development. It's a lot about how are we creating sort of the entrepreneurial, making sure the entrepreneurial talent and the scientific talent are connecting and understanding and willing to take the risk. And then it also is about bringing the venture capital piece into that equation. And despite the fact that venture capital is way off for biotech, it's way off across the US, but it's still in being way off, way higher than where it was in 2017, 2018 in New York City. So we are now seeing that there is a sort of a recognized critical mass that's starting to form within New York City. It has a whole long way to go, but unlike Boston and San Francisco, we haven't overbuilt because lab space because we weren't already in sort of a boom cycle, because we were always really just on the cusp of building this ecosystem. So as the EDC approaches this is not about what's going to happen this quarter or like what we're going to get into production next year. We're really thinking about sort of a decade, 2030. That's not really a decade from now, but in that sort of time period and stretch. And we think if we are striking on the building the partnerships with academia in order to create the right sort of commercialization framework, building the ecosystem through talent development out of DOE schools and through specialized university programs and internships, and also creating the lab space, that we will absolutely be successful. And the last sort of factor in all of this is that New York City is now broadly understood as being the center of gravity for AI. What Silicon Valley did in terms of laying the foundation, New York City is now leading the charge, and AI and biotech are at a very exciting confluence. And I think that what New York is going to need to do for itself is figure out what is the part of life sciences where it is going to claim like its dominance in. And it's not going to be in some of the genome and genetic sequencing. That's Boston. They were the early lead. I really think there is something around biotech and AI, and we're seeing that happening and unfolding here today.
So, listen, Melissa's an expert on this, and I can speak to it from the private sector, and I think it's fair to say we're one of the leaders in on the commercial side, trying to serve what we hope and believe, like Melissa, will be a growing sector of the economy. I don't see, the words you chose, I don't see the city betting on this so much as cheerleading and supporting it. So when you think about the New York economy, people sometimes forget that two of our strengths, as Melissa said, one is, we have a healthcare ecosystem, for lack of a better word, that is probably unequaled in the world. And we are not only the #2 recipient of NIH dollars, the research going on here, the university systems are just incredible. And so it's a natural place for EDC in the city to think about helping this, grow into a more vibrant part of the economy. From our perspective, and I think we were the first to build a new life science building since Alexandria built their project on the East River, which that building is vacant today. But we're sort of the story here, because we also have over 100,000 square feet that are leased to a range of startups and not-for-profits and publicly traded companies. We have an incubator that EDC funded under the Bloomberg administration. We have a second graduation space incubator opening up. We'll have the ribbon cutting, we think, later this month. And we happen to be located, as I mentioned earlier, between Columbia University and City College and near the hospital center. So we think we're a natural location for it. We're seeing, these sprouts of startup companies, more translational, tech transfer from the universities and from places like IndieBio that EDC, in fact, brought from California, I believe, into New York as an accelerator, and SOSV, who landed in Jersey City and some of the other areas. But I think what New York, and I've said this in meetings with EDC, I think what New York is missing right now that could really supercharge this effort are some of the bigger companies. So we have Pfizer's headquarters here. We don't have a large lab environment. We don't have any lab, I don't believe, from Pfizer in New York City. And if you look at the geographic area of the East Coast, we have these great companies surrounding New York, Merck, Pfizer, Regeneron, et cetera. And you have a lot of those people who don't like reverse commuting. And so part of what we're trying to do, and the city's trying to do, is also encourage those companies to have some sort of presence in New York. We also think it's inevitable that this sector will continue to grow. In terms of the Wall Street Journal article, little other article in Cranes, I'm sure BizNow with you are going to write the best article of all of them. But Boston, and I'm sure I have these numbers wrong, but I mean, Boston's life science market, I think, is 40 million square feet. I think New York's, I don't know what it is, 3 million square, I don't know how it gets counted.
I think it's 4 million.
You know, but it's not at the, you know, even if every building was empty, which it's not, it wouldn't be a catastrophe. We're primed for growth. And EDC supports that growth in a number of ways, as does, as I mentioned, the state of New York and ESD and the Regional Economic Development Council. And I think it's a great area that the city's going to succeed in growing.
All right, last question from me before we open up to questions from the audience. We're going to do quick lightning round. You know, try and keep your answer to like 10 words if you can. What neighborhoods or areas of the city do you think you're going to see change or transform as a result of these economic development initiatives, including City of Yes for housing opportunity, including City of Yes for economic opportunity? Are there neighborhoods, are there hotspots? Where do you think it's going to change? Who wants to go first?
I think you follow the rezonings. That's the way I look at it. You look at Inwood, East Harlem, anywhere that the city rezoned, it's not just a zoning change. There's typically an investment, a capital investment in that community as well. It's not just a piece of paper, libraries, schools. So that's typical. That's been my mantra for 20 years.
So for me, I think the city and the world works in cycles, and I think we've seen an incredible cycle with a movement of young people, in particular down to the Lower East Side and Brooklyn, and I think we're seeing those areas become very expensive. And I look at areas where we're active, like Upper Manhattan and the 125th Street corridor in particular, where pre-COVID there was a massive secular movement of improvement about to happen, which really got, I think, sidetracked during COVID, that now those projects, including ours, are getting finished. And so I think that you're going to see, and you know, we believe Upper Manhattan still is an authentic neighborhood for whatever we all think that believes, relative to a lot of these neighborhoods that are getting a little more antiseptic with chain stores, whatever. And so we think that as you know, as an integrated neighborhood, you know, immigrants who come here in creative classes and immigrants who come here from other countries and people looking for places that they can afford to live, want to live, will start to move uptown and look uptown again. It's more than 10 words, I apologize. But
10 words was a bad limit, I apologize. Melissa?
I'll give a shout out. The EDC runs the New York City ferry system. We have a network of 27 landings across New York City. We will evaluate that network over time for growth. That has opened up so much of the waterfront and really shortened people's commutes dramatically in a part of the city that was not really transit accessed. I think there's going to be a lot of energy there and continued energy on the waterfront and coastline.
Okay, who has a question? Anybody? Really? Excellent, over there. And while the mic is going in your direction, I've been asked to remind everybody that there is a cocktail hour after this that I think is downstairs. Downstairs, thank you. So please stick around for that, it should be fun.
Hello, thanks for speaking. I'm Roman. What do you think will happen to Class B and C office buildings in New York City if the City of Yes fails or if it passes?
So I spend today, I'm sure people saw this deal because it shocked a lot of people and I had to answer questions. I was not involved in it. I just walked the building today. 135 West 50th Street was a leasehold that sold for $8.5 million at an auction. I think it's about a 300,000 square foot building. So obviously all of my friends who are not in real estate called me up that day. How can you buy a building in New York that big in the middle of Midtown next to Rockefeller Center for $8.5 million? I tried to explain to them that it was a leasehold and there was a very large ground lease payment. But I walked the building today with the group out of Texas who bought it. They have no holdings in New York, not one. I think that was their exuberance. I think they were just so excited for $8.5 million. One of the reasons that they actually said they think they won the deal is because the deal was auctioned off on 10X. And they said the typical deal on 10X is between $5 and $10 million. So nobody in that range ever thought a building like that would look that way. That said, I walked the building as just through a friend, a broker who was helping them. And I sat for about 2 hours trying to come up with ideas. And there's tons of great ideas. Implementing them will take time. And this is a Class A building. It's 35% occupied, great views at the top. And I left there, and obviously it's easy to say, we'll convert it to residential, right? That's the easy thing to say. Actually figuring out the construction, I think office is going to go through a very long transformation. As I said, this was just one building that I toured today. And if I didn't just want to throw out the vanilla, you can convert it to apartments, I could probably sit for a month and come up with ideas. And it's not easy to make execution decisions when the construction is fairly complicated, the end use is completely new, and the life cycle to get there, we could be in a completely different market by then.
Yeah, my feeling is that I think these things take time, and so we're going through this mark-to-market process, as I mentioned. But I don't believe, and I agree with Melissa that we need, everyone needs to make New York a great place to live and work. I think that what you're seeing in the expensive, there's this buzzword, flight to quality. I think what you're seeing, in fact, are expensive buildings being occupied by tenants who can afford it to go to those buildings. So I think, and you saw today, everybody saw Amazon is having their corporate executives go back to work. So I think there's going to be more and more of a movement of other companies requiring people to come back to work more. And I think ultimately not all of these Class B and C buildings are going to fail. But if you think about, a time when basically risk-free money has such a high return, that the value of these buildings has to come down, a massive amount in order to have people hang around for however many years until whether there's a new use figured out or they get, redeveloped as office buildings or knocked down or they're worth the land underneath them, which is really all we're talking about with converting them to housing. So I'm more hopeful long term, but there's still a lot of pain that our city and our real estate communities can go through. Just to add from my experience today, at one point I looked across from these very nice people from Dallas. I said, I have a great idea. I said, what? They said, you paid $8.5 million for this? I said, I take my hat off to you. I said, why don't you turn it into an office building? And they looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, why don't you just charge much less rent? And I agree with Scott. Like I said, by the time you figure out all these hundreds of office buildings, we may be in an environment where people come back to work. So I sort of looked at them. I said, at your basis, I have a great idea. Just go to market in this area $60, so you'll lease it $35. They looked at me like I was crazy. Like, we have to convert it to residential. That's what it says in the newspaper. And so, right. Yeah, the two biggest stories, I think BizNow is pushing both of them, are conversion from office to residential and life sciences, both of which are, I think, relatively small in the big picture of New York City.
We're not pushing anything. We're reporting on things that are happening. I thought I was supposed to deliver the unfair allegations here. Anybody else? Any other questions? Nobody? Going once? Going twice? Oh, another one over there. Thank you.
Wait,
You're saving them from my questions because mine are much meaner.
I've done this route before.
Hello again. Thanks for speaking. What do you guys think of I'm a real estate broker in New York. I do investment sales. And a common complaint I hear a lot is about the tax code in New York City, in particular with the office class. I think some of these buildings have seen their tax bases go up, even though their vacancy has also gone up. What do you think of the current, for the market rate, multifamily, but also office and other asset classes? What do you think of the tax code in New York? Does it need reform? What might that look like?
I understand New York City property tax law about as well as I do my 16-year-old daughter. Look, multifamily in New York pays, in Manhattan, Class A multifamily doorman buildings pay almost 30% of the gross in real estate taxes, which means a young person who's paying $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year is paying the same amount of real estate taxes as a young professional that someone who owns a brownstone in Cobble Hill does. It's all never made sense to me. I inherited it, so I work with it. But I always tell people when we talk about 485X or 421A or Affordable New York, remember that we're working backwards, right? We have a tax system that, to me, like I said, makes no sense. So we have to come up with fixes for it. But to me, I never understood why we went to the 4 classifications. It happened when I was really a little kid. But I heard now with current litigation, it may go back to 1 classification under residential. But co-ops, condos, like I said, it makes no sense to me. I just work within the system.
Any other answers? All right, I think you've been saved from my questions and everybody else has been saved from more questions from Roman. Thank you so much. We're out of time. As I said, there is the cocktail hour. Please head downstairs and enjoy. Thank you.